Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you are in legal, HR, compliance, ethics, people are coming into the room here. So as always, we're going to give them a moment. We got a great guest today. His name is Joey Price. Round of applause for Joey. I'll introduce him here in a sec. So we had a little audible that we had to pull. We had a little emergency yesterday. Our guest for today had an emergency pop up. So Joey was just on the Ethics Experts. If you guys have not checked out the Ethics Experts, comes highly recommended by my mom. She says she thinks it's the best podcast out there. But he was on last week. We had such a great conversation, and he's an expert on both HR and AI. So today, instead of talking about ethical failures, we're going to be talking about, do your employees want AI? We're going to be covering some really cool topics. And the thing about Joey is super smart, consummate expert, but also he has a really unique perspective on AI that I thought was a interesting reframe for me when I was talking to him last week. And so given everything that's going on, given the how pervasive this is coming, we thought this was going to be a fun topic. So as people are coming in, a couple of reminders. First of all, I have not eaten lunch yet, and I get very hungry for emojis. So if you hear something cool, something smart, something funny, hit us with those emojis, hit Joey with those emojis, and let's keep this thing going. As always, we want this to be extremely valuable for you. We take very seriously the time that you allocate to the Ethicsverse every single week. And so if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have perspectives, please drop those in the chat. As people are coming in to the chat right now, please drop in your URL for your LinkedIn. And like we say every single week, your network is your net worth. Neither of those are big enough. So reach out. I challenge you to reach out to someone, at least one person, make one new connection, one new friend in this special community that we all have as we try to change the world by making our workplaces better. Couple of brief announcements. As always, follow us. You can sign up for the Ethicsverse by clicking this QR code. Hold your phone up and click that if you want to sign up for the Ethicsverse. That way you can be invited every single week to these weekly sessions. Of course, we're giving out SHRM credits. We give out CCB credits as well. Follow Ethico in the middle there. On LinkedIn, we give the best clips from the conferences we go to, from the webinars we do, from the smart people that come on to our podcast. We share those there. So you can sprinkle your feed with a little bit of insights. And finally, follow me if you dare. So today's giveaway is Mary Shirley's book, Level Up. Round of applause for Mary. She just put this book out. It's on pre-order, just got launched yesterday. So we are going to give folks the option of getting the hard copy, which will be out in, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks, or the Kindle today. So if you want, you can go on Amazon, search for Mary Shirley, search for Level Up, and you can pre-order that Kindle now. This is going to be a phenomenal book about how you can level up your program and really start to crowdsource risk intelligence at scale. And she has such a unique voice and such a full of great ideas that I unabashedly steal all the time. So a good portion of anything smart you hear from me is probably taken from her. So as I say, we are going to be giving away 5 of these babies today. So those are going to be for Ethicsverse members who are the biggest participants. So if you haven't signed up for the Ethicsverse, go ahead and do that now. We'll be using the most current bucket of folks who are subscribers to the Ethicsverse for this particular giveaway. The ecosystem is our integrated system to optimize ethics and compliance within your organization. We've poured a ton of money into this tool. We've gotten a bunch of insights from people on the front lines, and we've built a next-gen tool that's really getting a lot of great traction in the marketplace. So even if you have something, even if your contract is in place for the next couple of years and you just like to kind of see what else is out there, drop a 1 in the chat right now, or go to our website and click for a demo. And what's nice about the demos that Ethico does is they're a leave your wallet at home demo. Okay, leave your purse at home demo. You can just kind of see what is out there. On to the speakers. Joey Price is the co-founder of Jumpstart HR. Like I said, he is an ethics expert, an alum. He's soon to be an Ethicsverse alum. He founded Jumpstart HR. And this organization does a bunch of outsourced HR services from payroll to recruiting to helping build out programs. He is really a wealth of knowledge. He has a great podcast as well called While We Were Working that covers, topics and tactics for the HR professional. And this is really transferable to anybody who's in business, anybody who's running a team. So I encourage you to follow him on YouTube, download, look for that podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. And he's even a TED, he's got a TED Talk out there as well. So anyways, Joey, welcome, brother. How's it going? Round of applause for Joey. Let's welcome him to the Ethicsverse.
Nick, after all that and seeing this picture, man, I feel like I need to come in with some theme music like WWE.
Yeah, we got to do it.
Man, no, this is cool. So glad to be here.
Yeah, man.
So
glad to have you. Thanks again for saving the day. You look like a superhero because you kind of are one. You kind of saved the day for us, given the emergency that our other guest had. So anyways, we're going to be talking about do your employees want AI? We're going to cover kind of few different areas. And again, we always want this to be a conversation. So if you have questions, please drop those in the chat. If you have comments, drop those in the chat, and we will, of course, integrate them like we always do. But we're going to be covering a few different areas. We're going to be talking about, first, how easy AI is. Okay, AI is easy. We're going to be talking about the ethics of using AI. And Joey, like I said, has some really interesting things to say about that. And finally, we're going to be talking about some precautions. AI is a very useful tool, and it's something that we can use to balance, innovation in our organization and create a lot of leverage. But there's some things to look out for, and there's some pitfalls that we're going to be discussing today. So with that, Joey, as I was kind of preparing for our talk today, I was thinking about how this AI revolution if you can compare it to literacy, I think it's an interesting comparison. And maybe I got this from a talk I was listening to over the last couple of weeks, but this person was likening this revolution to back in the feudal days where, there was really just the high priests and the monks who knew how to read and write, and everybody else who was working on their feudal farms, they just needed to go ahead and work. And at some point, there was an inflection point where literacy started to kind of permeate throughout more of the populace. And now, obviously, most all folks can read and write and so forth. And if you look at that from, if you kind of use that track of literacy as a comparison point relative to this AI innovation, I think it can open our minds to a lot of the possibilities of what AI can do and what it's likely going to do over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And you could talk about the feudal days with literacy. You could also even go back to a time that we're more closely associated with and the introduction of the computer. If we asked our parents, what was it like when the first computers were around? They would tell you that it's this big box that only a few companies had. Maybe, NASA had it because of the whole Hidden Figures conversation, and we saw that there. If you're a fan of the show Mad Men, we saw how it introduced itself into the workplace there. And now we have computers in our phones, we have computers in our watches, we have computers in our car. And so technology, it starts small, it has a small impact on one sort of entity or group or power dynamic, but then it expands into other places. And so I agree. I think that this whole AI revolution, it truly is going to be a revolution because it's going to be transformative. It's starting with the small pockets now, those people who are embracing it, adopting it, rolling it out into their businesses, and then it's just going to expand and explode from there.
So tell us, as we kind of frame this conversation out and as we kind of jump in, we were talking about that story of that lawyer. Give us that little story time to talk about, how it can sort of go wrong before we dive into how easy AI can be and how we can really start using it now.
Yeah, so AI is not without its bugs. It's not without its flaws. And recently there was a lawyer who got into a bit of a public media snafu, and more importantly, a career snafu, because he relied on tool ChatGPT to essentially write a briefing that he was submitting to a case and submitting to a judge. And within a briefing, I didn't go to law school, but within a briefing, you cite cases that help prove your point. And what happened was this person submitted a document with cases that didn't even exist. And what happened was the tool essentially created fake cases. So that's how you can get it wrong. My school of thought here is when it comes to artificial intelligence, trust but verify, and then if you can't verify it, don't trust it. So maybe you're not using it for research purposes or for citation purposes, but maybe you're using it to craft the way that you speak or the way that you articulate a thought, and that piece is a little bit easier to navigate and manage and has a little bit less risk.
Yeah, I think if we can reframe AI from like the end all be all thing that we're relying on, from that to something more like a brainstorming partner, it really kind of opens up a lot of kind of leverage for us. So when we're thinking about, how easy AI is, what do you think are some examples on a day-to-day basis that, ethics, compliance, HR, legal could and should be utilizing AI to create some of that leverage?
Yeah. Well, so first, let's bridge the gap here because so many people think that artificial intelligence is this new thing, this new wave that you're not currently exposed to, and it's to be feared. But if you use a phone, if you go to a bank and use an ATM, if you use Apple Pay at checkout, if you punch an address into a GPS and it routes you there, you're already using artificial intelligence. You're already using something that helps alleviate the pressure of thinking, of calculating, of moving data from one place to the other. So it's already something you're using. You're just maybe not using it as often in the work setting. But ways that you can use AI from an ethical or HR or legal perspective. One big thing I talk about is, yes, somebody mentioned Siri. We have Siri. So that's the major form of artificial intelligence where you can just ask it to do something. I won't say, hey, fill in the blank, because everyone listening, your phones would go off. But when you think about AI at work, there's the idea of drafting communication. There's the idea of not only researching something, but compiling a school of thought or a line of thought. There are tools out there that allow you to have automated follow-ups with maybe it's from a sales perspective or a candidate experience, reaching out and saying, hey, we haven't finished the hiring decisions yet, but we wanted you to know that you're still in the running. All these sorts of things that people wish humans would do by spending time writing, pushing buttons, and sending. AI can allow you to do all that at scale so that you save time, that you save you eliminate stress, and you have better outcomes and better productivity because you're now able to leverage a tool that can do work and do a bit of thinking on your behalf.
So I think that's absolutely spot on. And we just did a series, highly reviewed series, not my words, people love this, but it was all about data analytics and taking data from a system, putting it into Excel and manipulating it. And after that, I got the upgrade and finally downloaded on ChatGPT, or I enabled the beta thing for Code Interpreter. And you can literally drop a CSV file of that whole data set that we went over in that 3-part series. You could drop that in there and it can start to give you some of those initial steps of our data analysis process where we're looking at the data and we're kind of doing that initial discovery, and it can spit out a bunch of graphs that are really going to cut down a ton of time. So if anyone's interested in us doing a session on that coming up, I'd be happy to do it, to kind of nerd out a little bit more on kind of pulling data analytics into ChatGPT and using that AI to help us find those biggest fluctuations in the data. That's just one kind of tip of the iceberg, one like little crumb of how we can leverage AI on a day-to-day basis to kind of do some of the work that's really going to get us started. Obviously, the commentary around those results that come out of that AI-based analysis, they need to be checked, trust but verify, to Joey's point, but it can really get you started and kind of help focus you on the things that are likely the things that need to be talked about as you report it up to the board or the audit committee or whoever you're reporting to. But Joey, when we're talking about, like, I'm going to list out a couple of different things, and maybe you can tell me
Sure.
which of these you think are appropriate and not appropriate to use AI for on a day-to-day basis. Presentation outlines, rejection letters, offer letters, job descriptions for job posts, data analysis. Maybe you have a blog post to write, something like that. Which of those things do you feel are valuable, and what other things do you think I'm missing? I'm just trying to kind of put people in the picture and kind of expand out how we can get those initial, building blocks for whatever piece of content we're trying to generate.
Well, Nick, I love that there are so many skeptics in the room today. I see the chat, and I want to respond to some of them
Yeah, do
through
that.
our conversation. But I don't think anything that you mentioned is necessarily out of bounds for using AI in the process. The only thing that you should pay attention to from an ethical standpoint, or the primary thing you should pay attention to from the ethical standpoint, is that ultimately you are responsible for the content that you put in front of others. So whether you use AI to generate a presentation outline and it saves you the time of having to brainstorm, think through how your slides are going to flow from one place to the other. If you use it to think about how to frame an argument, or to drive a point home, or to set up a big idea, you can utilize artificial intelligence. And one of the big things that I like to do, for example, with ChatGPT, is you can actually talk to it like it's a person. Like you can pretend you're a coach. You can say, hey, you are a content marketer for a B2B HR consulting company. You are being tasked with creating an outline for a presentation that is going to be for this audience and cover this topic. Let me see what you come up with. And then it'll start to bring that information. But it's still your responsibility to review it for accuracy, make sure it accomplishes the goal that you're looking for. And you can always go back and refine your queries, or ask it to regenerate its output. So you can absolutely use it for the presentations. With job descriptions, I think the big thing with it is just making sure that what comes out is edited, and then you place online what's been filtered through what I would call the realistic job expectations of a role. So, for example, if you were just to go to a tool, whether it's ChatGPT or another, and say, "Hey, I'm hiring for a CFO. Can you give me a CFO job description?" It's likely going to pull information from the interwebs about what a CFO does, and it's going to compile a job description for you. But it's your responsibility to go and evaluate that job description and say, okay, does this apply to our organization? If yes, go forward. Does it not apply? Then don't. So from that standpoint, for example, if it says, if one of the line items is, you must be great at leading teams, but you work for a small business and you know the CFO is going to be the only person in the finance department, then you don't need necessarily to need to be good at leading teams. You might want to replace that with must be a good self-starter and is able to prioritize and delegate tasks and ask for help appropriately. So it's making sure that someone said in the chat, use as a template but modify for your own use. That's right. You're getting a canvas that already has something on it. And I think as humans, we are better editors than we are creators. And so it just gives us something to edit. You had mentioned offer letters, rejection letters. Those things are inbounds as well. But you also want to make sure that you are scrutinizing it, because an offer letter, you're presenting legal information to someone. You're presenting their salary. You're presenting whether or not they're eligible for overtime or not. You're presenting whether they're salaried or hourly. You're presenting if there are contingencies that are required for their hire. So, for example, if this offer is contingent upon reference checks, this offer is contingent upon background checks, you've got to make sure that you are the final reviewer for what information is presented. And you've got to make sure that you are vigilant about that. You're vigilant about that.
Yeah, you don't want to wind up in that sort of corollary to what that lawyer had to deal with, where his name was like dragged through the mud. His entire reputation was ruined because he didn't like look at it. And it's definitely not something to just pull off of the screen and just submit. To your point, it should be a building block. I kind of think of it as like if you're making a I hope there's no chefs in the room because they might get roasted. I might get roasted for this. Luckily, there's no thumbs down emojis, I don't think. But it's like stock for starting a soup, right? It's like those little bouillons, right? Like you can go and you can make your own chicken stock, but you also can buy some stock off the shelf, or you can have one of those bouillons that you can spruce up and you can add some of your seasoning to. And just like I would rather, if I had all the time in the world, I'd rather make a pot of tomato sauce like from scratch. But sometimes we don't have to, sometimes I don't have time to do that because we have kids and stuff like that. So I get something off the shelf and I just kind of spruce it up a little bit. And I think that same approach to whatever is coming out of the AI, I think is, it's important to have that framework. The other thing that I've seen as a little bit of a pitfall as people use it, because I think it's a great tool. John made this comment here and he said, I have trouble with the idea that artificial intelligence is thinking or a replacement for thinking. And I agree with that. I think if you're outsourcing your thinking to anyone or anything, that's a fail. But I think it can be, that sort of chicken stock for whatever dish you're making. One thing that I've seen people kind of slip up on, though, is they're not going back and forth on the thread with the AI. So sometimes it'll spit something out and, you can say, that's a good start, but we're in a manufacturing setting and our main concerns are X, Y, and Z. Like, let's say we're building a policy with it or using it to sort of build that policy. Another thing that I've seen folks do is, we have to keep it, again, this is like a shortcut. It's not a silver bullet. And I think that's a really important distinction, especially when we start to think about all of these pieces of communication potentially being aspects of our employer brand. Our employer brand is just, the same thing as our external brand, the thing that we present to the market. This is the internal brand. It's what we're presenting to employees. And a certain consistency in our outward marketing, is super important so that we're kind of showing the same image across all these different channels. We want to have the same level of consistency for our internal brand as we're putting out policies and as we're putting out, different communications to our employee base and that group of stakeholders. And so something else you can do is you can take samples of a certain voice of other content and feed that in and say, hey, I'm going to give you some content and I'd like you to generate whatever you're looking for, this next policy in the same voice and so forth. And you can really train that on particular threads.
Yeah. Yeah, you had mentioned something about someone in the chat mentioned I have trouble having AI think for me. Well, yeah. I wanna double down and say, well, first of all, it is thinking for you, but ultimately it's your judgment call what to do with the information. I'll give a real-time example of something that you do every day. When you hop in your car and you go to work, yes, you know how to get there. Now, for those of you who, walk from your bedroom to your home office, this doesn't apply. But for those who are going into the office, you know how to get to your office. But you're using your GPS, you're putting the destination in, and it is telling you, okay, there's a traffic jam here. You should go another route. Or your route is delayed 20 minutes or 10 minutes because of an accident. It is thinking for you so that you don't have to say, let me go up to that accident and see for myself what I need to do before I get there, right? It is already going for you. Another one is, your oven at home, right? You need to preheat something or heat up the oven to 400 degrees because you want to make lasagna, right? Are you going and saying, okay, I'm going to light a fire and this fire is going to be 400 degrees? And I'm like, no, you're not doing that. You're trusting the technology to produce an outcome that you're expecting. And so the same thing applies to AI or ChatGPT. Again, it's not a perfect tool. It's not going to spit something out with 100% accuracy, but it gets you far enough along where you can become the final editor and the final thought partner in this thing to get it across the finish line and to proceed. Someone asked a question about, how does AI and ChatGPT add meaning to your work? I use this tool every day. It's not always for outward facing things. Maybe it's like kind of a scratch pad, but you can, as you're prompting it, it helps you be a better writer. It helps you become a better communicator, because one of the things that is important for us on our website is search engine optimization. Well, there are tools we have in the back end of our website that tell us if we can rank higher, or if we won't, based on what's on there. You can tell Chat GPT to say, hey, um, in order to rank high in SEO, you need to write on a fifth grade level, right? So it helps me articulate a thought or communicate an idea at a level that will be easier for more people to read. And there's something called the flesh test, which is like, can people read this? Basically, is this too hard to understand? I can say, hey, um, give me a summary of something, but make sure it passes the flesh test with of a score of 80 or better. And then that allows you to get that information, review it, make sure it's correct, and then use it as it needs to be. So, my workflow might be to create something in ChatGPT, then I'll dump it into Grammarly, because Grammarly is going to check for edits and errors. It's also going to check for plagiarism. So if something is found elsewhere on the web, usually those scores are low from the things that I find, but if there is, you can always tweak it and change it. But someone said it, it's a tool. It's a piece of the process. It's not the end all be all.
John had a great question here. Can Chat GPT screen content for compliance issues? And I'd love to hear from the chat if anyone has had experience with that. I think that could be on a case-by-case basis, and it depends on what compliance issues you're screening for. At a minimum, I think it can help highlight perhaps some compliance issues you might want to be looking out for in whatever content you're reviewing on your own. If it's a contract or it's a job description or something that has a little bit more weight or a little bit more gravity to it. Again, to Joey's point, it's going to be on you at the end of the day to be that screen. But if you can get some insight from your brainstorm partner, it can help you kind of accelerate a little bit faster. So Joey, let's talk a little bit about the learning curve of implementing AI or using it on a day-to-day basis. Can you speak to that a little bit, and how can organizations ensure that there's a smooth transition for employees? And what I want to kind of, I'd like you to answer that, but I think the core thing is that this is being used in your organizations. People on your team, those early adopters, those people who have who had the iPhone first, or who are using Alexa, or are more wired. These people are already using it and figuring out ways to implement it in their day-to-day tasks to create some of that leverage, and to spend more of their time, I think, doing the things that they're actually best at, versus kind of building that initial, if you're an interior decorator, you need an interior to decorate. If you can get the house built and you can really put that unique skill set you have to work, and more of your time can be spent on that, presumably you're having a bigger impact on the pursuit of that mission. But talk to us a little bit about the learning curve and what kind of guardrails people should maybe put around themselves, or what they can sort of articulate to other folks on their team who I'm guarantee are using it.
Yep. So first thing I'd say is before you train, coach, adopt, roll out any artificial intelligence tool, I would advise you to have an artificial intelligence at work policy. It's something that we're able to craft for you. So if you're interested, you could go to our website and we can craft that. But I was talking to a reporter for a Canadian newspaper a couple months ago, and I was talking about how you kind of want to shy away from putting in data that's proprietary, or talking about things that are secret to the company. Because the example I gave was, if an HR professional used ChatGPT in such a way where they said, hey, I work for TD Bank and we're getting ready to do mass layoffs. Obviously, this is fictional, right? But if I work at TD Bank, we're getting ready to do mass layoffs. What are some things I should know? Or how can you craft a letter? The thing about a tool like ChatGPT and possibly other technologies, you don't, many people don't read the terms of service, so you don't know where that data goes once you've sent it out into the ether. So you'd want to make sure that people aren't sharing or communicating about proprietary or sensitive information through ChatGPT or another tool that's similar. You'd also want to make sure that people are aware that they are the final responsible partner or party for what is produced in your organization. So you can't use as an excuse, oh man, ChatGPT told me to write that, or they said that it was a good thing to do. Um, and
Right.
we should expand this out, because it's not just ChatGPT. The more we blink, tools are incorporating generative AI more and more. So whether it's Slack, whether it's QuickBooks, whether it's maybe Indeed or a hiring platform will say, "Oh, give us a job title and we'll craft a job description." Right. So we're seeing it being utilized more and more across different markets. So yeah, Instacart, Kayak, Expedia, Zapier. These are all companies that are using artificial intelligence plugins to make your experience seamless and effective. So yeah, from a privacy standpoint, just make sure that you are not sharing sensitive data. Make sure that you're owning what's the finished product. And I think the other thing is, just making sure that you're passing whatever cybersecurity or IT protocol you have in your organization. Make sure the use of this tool is the same. So, for example, if you only use company laptops to produce company work, make sure somebody's not using ChatGPT on a cell phone or a personal computer.
Right.
So these are the sorts of things that you have to be accountable for, because it's just a new way to do things that we're already doing, but you do need to protect yourself.
To your point, Brian made this comment a couple minutes ago, and he said, the fine print of ChatGPT says that anything you download and share is available to ChatGPT. They're obviously using all of these prompts and all of the work that each of these threads are doing to, retrain itself over and over again. And so really, guarding that sort of confidential information like you would if you were talking to a friend or a spouse, you need to have that same level of care there as well.
Yeah.
So let's start talking about like the ethics of AI, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like the AI impact on job security and how an overuse of AI can actually be kind of unethical from a job creation standpoint. I think you have a really interesting position on that.
Yeah, so and I love the pictures that we had at first for the intro of you and I. But I think the most ethical use of AI from a standpoint of jobs is to think about it like how Iron Man uses his suit. So the way that I view artificial intelligence at work and the relationship between talent and technology is that it should help make people stronger, but I'm not the biggest fan of using it to replace or reduce jobs. You'd mentioned that I did a TEDx talk. I did one back in May of 2023 where I talked about getting off of a plane in Seattle, Washington, doing a cross country flight. Getting into the airport, all of the shops were closed except for McDonald's. But then when I went to McDonald's and I wanted to talk to someone to place my order, it was a robot. And then now I have this thing where any airport I go, it's big in Austin, Texas. In Austin, Texas, you can get a cup of coffee, you can get a pizza, and you can get cupcakes, all just from robot interaction. Um, but I talked about how if these jobs can be replaced in Seattle, Washington, what does that mean for the jobs back where I'm from in Baltimore and DC? And so when you talk about eliminating jobs, you're also having the serious conversation about eliminating economic stability for
Right.
populations of the workplace. And it's not just frontline jobs that can be impacted. So, your restaurant workers, your your yeah, your restaurant workers, your frontline warehouse folks, but there are also, contract reviewers or even attorneys, right, of producing documentation through artificial tools. I'm not big on disrupting the jobs dynamic there, but I do think we can use these tools to help make us better at our job. A case in point would be if you look at your to-do list today, and if you have respond to this person by email, draft this document, um, analyze this spreadsheet. These are all things still things that you own, but if you had a tool that could help you do it faster and help you do it with more precision, that could give you less time to be in the administrative side and more time to talk and connect with people, or to research your craft, or to instead of having a 60-hour work week, maybe whittle that down to a 50 or 40, right? So it's all about that Iron Man suit and making sure that you are faster, better, stronger at your role, and not job elimination.
Yeah, I want to kind of double down on that. And I know you mentioned this comment from a couple minutes ago from David of how does AI, ChatGPT increase the meaning and value in our work? And I think dovetailing off of what you're talking about, I think there's an opportunity for us to get out of the mundane or spend less time on the mundane things and spend more time on the pieces of our job that are most meaningful. And I think if you can, I think an interesting corollary, I think it's interesting because I just kind of made this up, but an interesting corollary is like the role that e-discovery played in the legal process. 20, 30 years ago, all that discovery was done by individuals. And what e-discovery did, which, I mean, it was somewhat disruptive, of course, but it did allow attorneys to spend more of their time on that meaningful work, not sorting through a bunch of emails and a bunch of documents, but rather focusing in on those needles in the haystack and formulating their legal opinion or their legal strategy around those. That I think is a decent analogy for how this can drive more meaning into our work and allow us to spend more of our our gifts or more time putting our gifts to work in pursuit of whatever mission we're on.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, real quick. We're kind of just
ahead, buddy.
fireside chatting it. Okay, cool.
That's how we do it around here. Yeah.
We all have heard the saying that people join companies, but they leave managers, right? I once had this talk about employee engagement and that manager conversation, and how people are upset with their managers because they don't either get the time, the interaction, or somehow they're not being developed, right? But one reason why managers aren't able to develop their team is because many times they're inundated with administrative tasks or duties or responsibilities. So if you were to free up the time spent on administrative tasks and duties, you could carve out more time to coach, develop, mentor. So I think that it makes sense to evaluate these tools, and not just how can it help us perform and have output, but what could that time mean for the employee and employer relationship, so that there's better retention, there's less regrettable turnover, there's more satisfied people in the workforce. It's freeing up that time so that it could be done there.
John asked, are there IP issues with ChatGPT? Is a marketing message, for example, yours, if ChatGPT creates it? What do you think about that, Joey?
So I'm no attorney, and I know that the laws are constantly changing around this. From my last understanding is that information from ChatGPT is not copywritten or trademarked by the tool in and of itself. So if you use the tool to produce it, you would own it. But again, I know the rules and laws are changing all the time, so it's probably best to consult an attorney on that particular topic.
I'm no attorney, so take all this with a grain of salt. But I think my answer to that question of is a marketing message that came out of ChatGPT yours? I would ask if you hired a marketing agency to come up with a new logo for you or a new, I don't know, a new slogan for you. Are those yours? I think it's kind of a corollary. I mean, you'd still have to trademark that logo. You'd still have to give the smell test to that new slogan before you sort of adopt it. But again, it's a tool. It's a collaboration partner, I think, to help us drive forward. So when we're thinking about like ethical policies that organizations should adopt, what do you think are some practical examples that they should, kind of consider as they're kind of balancing these AI integration into their operations?
I think it'd be helpful to come up with some trainings because trainings will help people know what the standards are, what the guidelines are, and what the expectations are. So that would be a big piece for me is if you tell people how to use the tool, then that will let them know if they've deviated too far to the left or too far to the right as far as their utilization of it. I also think it's important, again, to have a policy in place for the way that we use artificial intelligence here at work, because quite frankly, your use of AI becomes one of the value propositions or value statements that you have in your organization. To use it or not use it says something about how you interpret the tool and how you interpret its use for advancing your business or not advancing your business. So it's important to have statements there. And I think just to continue to monitor how others are using the tool and even how government is thinking about the tool. I know in Italy, ChatGPT is banned. And then in New York City, they have reduced your ability to use AI tools in the hiring and recruiting process because in many degrees, they found certain aspects of using technology can create bias. And so there's that. But those aren't the only places that are thinking about the use of AI. And the more we know about it and the more outcomes we're seeing, I have a strong feeling that government will come with its own stance and opinion, and that will become the new guardrails for how we use these tools at work and what limits can be pushed by those who create these tools.
Yeah, and to that point, we're a little bit in the Wild West right now, and we have to kind of, until those sort of macro guardrails are in place, people are kind of figuring it out. Listen to what Russell said. Russell said, our company, hey, thanks for this comment, Russell. Our company has written its first AI policy. We can use it, but one, you have to be transparent. Two, be aware that it can hallucinate, so you have to check the outputs. And three, never put confidential information or personal data into these tools. And Jacqueline said, we've been writing policies around who can use AI tools for what and how. It's a big conversation since our engineering team is really into it. So again, that engineering team, those are those early adopters. Those folks are diving in, totally nerding out on it. What kind of guidance would you give somebody who's trying to think through how it can be used, who can use it? What kind of like guidance or perspective, frameworks, whatever, would you share about that kind of a question? How it can be used, who can use it?
Yeah, I think there's many ways to approach this, but the path that I'll choose is to think about your business goals and what is it that you ultimately want to accomplish. So that's everything from how do you deliver your service or product to your customer, how do you evaluate employee work and output, all the way to the brand promises that you have maybe in your marketing materials or your values and your set of values. Start there, so you're kind of beginning with the end in mind, and then you might ask yourself, what are some ethical ways to use AI to advance these areas? Then you might say, what are some unethical ways to use AI to advance these areas? And then from there, you might go a layer deeper and say, okay, now that we know the ways or we've imagined some ways, who in our organization should be able to use these tools? And then who should be supervising them? So you start to create a framework where you're working backwards to say, well, what are the outcomes that we want to create? And then how are we going to get there? So, for example, the group that's the engineering team is so thrilled about it. Maybe if you're in a software development environment, you might say it's important for us to be on the cutting edge of meeting the needs of our customers. So our development team is going to use AI, and we're going to give them more leverage to do that. But maybe our, I don't know, accounting team doesn't have that same amount of interaction with the tool because it's not as advantageous, or the risk doesn't outweigh the reward in that area. So that is a start. That's a start.
John just wrote, in factories, there's been this transformation from hands-on building stuff to managing machines that build stuff. And I think AI will create a similar revolution in the thinking professions, which is so interesting because in our knowledge work economy, which we're squarely in right now, where we are our work, we haven't had that same sort of industrial revolution thing that happened where kind of hands are moving into machines. And the way we kind of navigate that, it's just wrought with a lot of complexity and challenges as people are trying to navigate through it. Let me ask, I want to kind of talk, we're kind of getting toward the end here, and I want to talk about some of these precautions. There was a famous story that I think I heard from you about Amazon had tried to, I want to talk about kind of precautions for using AI in day-to-day work. I want to really kind of dive into that more because this is something that, again, is part of our, it's a bigger part of more and more people's day-to-day use. And, again, we're in the Wild West. We're kind of on the frontier of this thing. But I think it was 2007, Amazon tried to utilize AI to do screening of resumes, and it found out that it was, biased against certain underrepresented groups, women, minorities, and so forth. So as we're thinking about that as sort of a cautionary tale, I think they ended up shutting that off. But as a cautionary tale, how do we make sure that we mitigate this sort of risk, the bias risk that is potentially inherent and likely inherent in AI? For
Sure.
HR decisions, for compliance decisions, whatever.
Yeah. So, an AI tool doesn't just wake up and say, "I want to be biased today," right?
Yeah.
That's just the truth. But what happens is it is programmed to be biased, and whether that is conscious or subconscious bias. Um, for example, Elon Musk just developed a board for this new rival for ChatGPT, and I forget the name. It escapes me, but it probably has the letter X in it.
Probably has an X in it or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's probably got an X in it. But he's got this board, and the whole board, there's ethnic diversity. Like there are white men and there are Asian men, and that's it. So if you think about a cultural perspective of a white male, of an Asian male, it may not be the same as even a white woman or a black woman or a Hispanic male. And so you lose out on ensuring that the outcomes that your tool creates or the decisions that you make have a equitable outcome for all. And so you want to make sure that if you're creating a tool, that you have diverse players who are creating it, as opposed to just a singular group of folks, or I guess the term is homogenous group of folks. Because there were even issues that I won't go into the details of it, but even Google search, right? There were certain search words that if you put the search word in, it would produce some pretty racially insensitive images as a result. So the tools aren't biased, the people are biased. And the question is was that a conscious bias or unconscious bias? Either way, it's biased. So we've got to be careful how we use it for recruiting or employment related issues, because a tool in and of itself can take the bias of its creator. So on our podcast a couple of months ago, we talked about groups that are using AI tools to manage layoffs, and how do you determine who gets laid off? Well, that's probably a bad idea to leave that up to a technology because it won't take into effect other things that matter with regard to employee performance. Um, so I probably wouldn't rely on AI tools for evaluating talent all by itself or evaluating groups of people all by itself. It's a useful um, it's a useful data point or data set, but I wouldn't use it as a primary factor in how we evaluate.
I want to go back to, that policy, and I just want to kind of dig into that a little bit. That policy idea of like who can use it, to be transparent, to not put sensitive information into it, and coupled with like who can use it and who can't use it. Like, how would we even police that? Because to your point, even if you block that on your internet, people have their own devices. They can email that to themselves, or they can email the results that they did on their phone to their personal email account and so forth. Like, it's really hard, I think, to make a secure environment that, if you err on the side of saying like, well, we're just not going to mess with this thing. I mean, how do we though get guys comfortable either internally or, up the chain with, responsible ways to make sure that it's, as it's coming into our organization, we're smart about it. Like, are we just relying on self-reporting? Is that fine? Is that the inevitable like terminus of this thing at the end of the day? The responsibility being on the user. Like, how do we think through that?
Yeah, I mean, there can be significant risk if you aren't managing the use of AI and tools like ChatGPT. But one of the big areas where that risk is great is in academia. And you introduce a tool like ChatGPT and other tools that produce writing. There are hundreds of maybe not hundreds, but at least tens of tools out there. What they've done in academia now is that there are tools that can actually scan and have write you the probability of whether this piece of content was drafted using artificial intelligence. And so we're seeing that in the academic space. Maybe there's a tool that is then adopted as like an audit for whether or not a piece was crafted using ChatGPT. Yeah, so I mean, you could do sample audits of text. Maybe there's a tool that can be produced or rolled out one day that scans all emails and reports to your CTO. This is flagged as potentially using artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. But I'm sure there's technology out there that exists or will exist to help you track the use of AI and as far as what is outputted and sent on behalf of your company.
Now, maybe I shouldn't be sharing this, but there's a tool called Hemingway that you can drop in something from ChatGPT, and then that'll tell you, if you drop it in clean, it'll say like there's a 99% chance that this was written by AI, and then you can click a button or you can upgrade to the full version. Not that I've done this, of course, but it'll rewrite it so that it'll pass that like human test. So, I mean, it just keeps kind of compounding. These tools kind of keep compounding, and it's just we will look back. Our grandkids will be asking us, if they're not androids, they'll be asking us, what was it like when AI first came out? We really are at this massive inflection point of this thing that's going to really kind of permeate everything. And if you think about the progression of AI over the last 3 years, say, there's this sort of interesting curve of like impact across usage. And there are, the value of impact is maybe highest on, from a revenue perspective, for example, optimizing ad spend across an organization. And on the other end of it is maybe an application at like a pizza shop or something like that. Well, that whole curve is really a fractal of a bunch of individuals. And that curve exists for each one of us. And there's tasks that are going to be kind of overtaken, or there are tasks in our day-to-day or our month-to-month work that AI is going to have that big impact. And I think people are kind of individually exploring to what extent they can create that leverage for their day-to-day work. And, it's just going to kind of keep pushing forward. Let's kind of, we got a couple of minutes left here. I want to dive into a couple of takeaways that I think. I also wanted you to react to this. Thanks for this comment. The EU regulation has thought about it adding water link on data produced by AI. I think that is extremely interesting. That's presumably some kind of a watermark on the data that's produced. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes. So let's talk about my takeaways from this session. I think AI is a useful tool. It's being used in your organization, but you have to have a clear understanding and training on making sure that the implementation and use of it doesn't violate your policies, doesn't violate confidentiality, and doesn't put you in a risky perspective as an organization. But at the end of the day, that starts with the individuals using it. And I think accepting the fact that it's being used and embracing the fact that it's going to be extremely difficult to weed the garden of any AI use can kind of open up that, hey, we have to figure out a way to wrap our hands around this or wrap our arms around it and provide the guidance. What would you add to that one?
Well, I just add that if you don't have a policy, you can't hold people to a policy. And I'm very big on making sure that you write stuff down, you memorialize it, because if you, for example, have an employee who puts you in some legal hot water, or even these days, PR hot water or social media hot water because of their use of AI, and you don't have a policy in place, well, you can't say that there was a standard to begin with. And so it weakens your argument of disciplining or adversely impacting that person because you didn't give them the guardrails in the first place. So I hope I'm preaching to the choir here, but for sure, you've got to have a policy in place, because otherwise you have no standard and you have no means of telling people what's right, wrong, or otherwise.
Great point. I think the next one is, using there is an ethical responsibility. I'll go ahead and say it. There's an ethical responsibility from a sort of broader economic impact to not necessarily use AI to get rid of jobs, but rather push people toward work that is going to be more meaningful and to create leverage in the organization. What do you have to say about that, since I kind of stole that one from you?
Yeah, so in my TEDx talk, I talked about the research that, of all people, Walmart and Procter & Gamble did with Accenture to identify, we know AI is coming. What do we do to protect our frontline workers, our warehouse workers, our store workers? And because if you go in Walmart now, you see that there is a whole line of self-checkout, right? And Walmart even has its own payment system. So, they don't do Apple Pay, but they have this Walmart branded thing, similar to Kroger Groups and Harris Teeters. But in the study, they found that while there will be 85 million jobs that are disrupted by artificial intelligence in the workplace, there will be 97 million new ones that are created as a result of artificial intelligence in the workplace. So that's a net positive of 12 million jobs all across the globe. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to remove and replace today's fast food restaurant worker, we should be moving them to transition them to becoming tomorrow's fast food robot programmer, so that we're not leaving a group of people behind, but we're upskilling, coaching, and guiding them on the opportunities that will exist in this new transformative artificial intelligence revolution.
Yeah, I mean, that is a risk that again, I hadn't really thought about so much, that there's a potential to leave a bunch of people behind and really kind of exacerbate this sort of division between the haves and the have-nots. If those people can be brought along and repurposed, so to speak, it really can be a massive a massive sort of point of leverage for our economy, as on a macro level, and for our individual work or our individual businesses on a micro level. And then finally, last one here. precautionary measures. When implementing AI, we have to be mindful of bias, and we have to be mindful of making sure that it's not being used inappropriately. And going back to what you said, there is, we have to have some kind of a policy in place. I want to add this comment from Jim. I think this is great. Policies are helpful, but not always required. Theft is theft. You don't need you don't need to say that that's against the rules. However, with respect to emergent areas like AI, probably a good idea to have a policy that's thoughtful, well-researched, et cetera. What would you add to this last precautionary measure takeaway for guys here?
Yeah, so just quick plug again. I know I'm talking about writing policies, but who are you going to go to write policies? We can do that for you at Jumpstart. So I think I dropped the link in the chat. But
Perfect.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Theft is theft, right? But I've run this company for 12 years. I've seen some crazy things with regard to unemployment hearings, lawsuits, so on and so forth, in the sense that it is better to have something written as a defense than it is to not, and to appeal to quote unquote the reasonable standard or the reasonable expectations that someone else is left to interpret. So you got to make sure that you have the policy in place. One example I could give is, there was a security guard that fell asleep at the job, and they were fired, and they went to claim unemployment to say, hey, I was fired. They said it was gross misconduct. Well, in the employee handbook, there was no mention of sleeping at the job being gross misconduct. And of course, this is the state of California, so it's a more employee-friendly state. So because sleeping at the job for a security guard wasn't itemized as gross misconduct or means for termination, this person was able to continue to receive and collect their unemployment. And I share that story not to say that you should be, fighting unemployment insurance, but just as a case in a case study to show that if you're relying on other people to interpret or articulate what's right and what's wrong as it pertains to your organization, and you're not doing it for yourself, you are doing your company a disservice, because you may spend more time than you need to in a courthouse, more money than you need to with an attorney. If you would have just itemized and said, this is what we do, right? This is what you shouldn't do, that's wrong. Here are the penalties for doing what's wrong, and then here are the rewards for doing what's right. You would save yourself a ton of time.
Yeah, I'm going to have a couple conversations with some folks on my team to make sure that they know sleeping at work is not cool. But I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much, Joey, for joining us. Round of applause for Joey. Let's drop some emojis on there. Follow him on LinkedIn. Joey R. Price. Follow his YouTube channel, and also check out that podcast. It's really good. While we were working. See you guys all next week. Again, credits will be available, replays will be available, and we will be we're rescheduling ethical failures as soon as possible. So stay tuned. Hope to see you all next week, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.